Alright, here we go. So, welcome. This is my class tier list for ESO. This is specifically has to do with PvE and specifically for trials. So this isn't necessarily PvE solo arenas, nothing like that. This is just for trials. What class you should be playing if you're looking for a group, you want to get into a group, what are groups kind of looking for? Uh, so I'm going to start out, I'm going to do this I'm going to go over Mag first, and then I'm going to talk about Stam. And in general, if you're trying to get into a trial and you play Stam, you're generally going to have a harder time. I kind of recommend if you're looking to get into a trial, you don't have a big preference on what class you're playing, and you just want to know what class you should invest time into learning so that you can be as appealing as possible looking for these raid teams. This list is what's going to be for you. So starting out, we have the Magdk, and we're starting out strong. Magdk is S tier. They've kind of benefited the most. The patch that we're on is the Deadlands patch, and Magdk's just kind of benefited from the recent changes. They weren't hit that hard by the critical damage cap. They didn't really have any critical damage bonuses. They weren't like Templars or Nightblades that had all these built-in bonuses that helped them get to the cap. And so they weren't necessarily at the cap to begin with. And now in this chapter here, they're never really going past the cap. They didn't really lose any damage. Combine that with their synergy with the charge trait, which most DKs are carrying in their offhand when they dual wield. And this is just increasing their ability to proc burning, which has always had really good synergy with DKs. It gives them sustain, and it just deals a ton of damage. Top that off, you know, more DKs isn't a bad thing, but every raid group is going to need at least one DK. They're going to need Engulfing Flames, and they're going to need someone who can run Zens fairly reliably. So Magdk's really good spot. If you want to look good, run the Magdk. You can't go wrong. Coming up next, we have the Magplar. So Magplars, I'm going to put at A plus tier. They're a little bit more situational than Magdk's. I believe they can hit as hard as Magdk's if they run the Vampire toggle, Simmering Frenzy. But that's a high skill ceiling playstyle. It's not going to work in every situation, and not every group's gonna allow you to run it. It's something where you'd have to prove yourself. If you're looking to just get into a group and get your foot in the door, coming in and saying that you're a Magplar and you use toggle, if no one knows you, it might give a bad impression. So I'm only going to put the Magplar at A plus tier. They might be able to contest the Magdk in terms of damage, but that's usually going to be using the toggle, which is, like I said, situational. Next up, we have the Magblade. Magblades aren't in a great spot. They were kind of hit pretty hard by the crit damage changes. A lot of their damage came from, light attacks. They're not a very great melee class, which, a Magdk is going to outperform them in melee. A Magplar is going to outperform them in melee. And, the new trial, Rockgrove, that's what everyone's concerned about. Sunspire, these are the big, higher trials that everyone wants to run, everyone wants to complete. They're just not the greatest in there. I don't think I can put them in B plus. I don't think that they're A though. I want to put them in at A minus, and I also think it's worth mentioning when it comes to the mini trials, VAS plus 2, VCR plus 3, these guys are still really good in there, especially because they can go fully ranged and still perform extremely well. Whereas the Magplar and the Magdk are a little bit more reliant on that melee sort of play style, running Trap Beast instead of Channeled Acceleration or Medusa or Zogvins. They're a little bit more melee locked. Next up, we have the Magsorc. Magsorc, I'm going to put at A tier. They're very similar to the Magblade in terms of playstyle, in terms of like where they're strong, VAS plus 2, VCR plus 3. Again, they don't really benefit from the melee playstyle in the same ways that DK or Magplar do. But the edge that they have over the Nightblade is they bring that minor prophecy buff, that little bit of extra spell crit. And every group kind of needs them. And similar to Nightblade again, Sorcs don't make the greatest support. You don't see a lot of supports running Sorc healers or Sorc tanks. Usually there's better support classes that are going to bring more to the group. And sorcerers can kind of compete with damage, especially when the fights are more ranged. So they provide a group buff. They provide decent damage. I think A tier is good for them. But I will say this though, if you're trying to get into your first trial group and that trial group already has like an established Magsorc person that they kind of go to, it might be a bit more competitive to get your foot in the door because they're probably gonna go with their established Magsorc that they're used to. And there's usually only one spot for a Magsorc in a raid group. So just keep that in mind that if you're wanting to run the Magsorc, that aspect might get in the way. Next up, we have the Magcro. And I'm going to put the Magcro, I'm going to put them here. They are not situational, and they can do a lot of damage. I'm not sure that they can hit necessarily as hard as a Magdk can, or even a Magplar with toggle. But they still do really good damage. They have really good cleave, and they at the end of the day they got the trump card. They drop the Colossus. They provide major vulnerability, and you can't really go without it. You need major vulnerability uptime. You need Magcros. Support don't usually run a full Magcro support team, and if you do run like a lot of crows in support, then you're kind of taken away from maybe like a healer din or a tank warden. And wardens are really best suited in those support roles. We got Mag Warden coming up next, and I'm actually gonna put Magdens down here at C+. They can do decent cleave, but their single target, their sustain, what they bring to a group. Really, the problem with Wardens, they don't have a lot of damage passives. The bear is unreliable. It doesn't work in certain fights. And realistically, like the stuff that they bring to groups can really just be provided by like a healer or a tank. And in a lot of ways, easier. Wardens have a group resistance buff. They can buff everybody's armor and magic resistance with Frost Cloak. Well, tanks and healers are going to use those abilities more often and without having to lose damage compared to your Magden. Magdens can throw Fetcher Flies and provide minor vulnerability. Again, that's something that a healer or a tank can just work into their rotation. Really, Magdens bring cleave, but Magcros bring just as much cleave and the Colossus. DKs are going to bring as much cleave and more single target. Magdens are just they're really out of it, and in the mini trials, you'd just rather have a Magblade or a Sorc. They're going to be able to do more damage. Yeah, Magden just doesn't really have a place currently. So that's kind of the Mag overview. And like I said, Mag, much better to get your foot in the door. If you're trying to get into a trial group, I would strongly caution you about showing up with a Magden. That's not something that usually most raid leads see, and they're like, oh yeah, Magden, where can I slot him? Especially not when they have to compete with stuff like, the DKs, toggle plars, major Colossus coming from, or major vulnerability coming from Magcros. And, they don't provide anything to the group that a tank or a healer doesn't already provide. So now let's look at Stam. And Stam is gonna, I think Stam is mostly gonna populate down here in the A's to the C pluses. It's really hard to judge where Stam is gonna fall. And if this is your first time looking for a raid team, I really, really caution you about running Stam. If you're a bit more established and people that you raid with, they are more familiar with your reputation, what you can bring to the table, maybe then you could bring out some Stam and prove yourself, right? But if you're trying to get your foot in the door, you haven't proved yourself yet, Stam is probably a big no-no. Starting us out, we have the Stamblade. Stamblade's in a weird spot. Stamblade actually is very similar to Magblade in that it's one of the best ranged Stam classes, but in terms of like pure melee, it's not the greatest. I think I'm gonna place Stamblade. Gosh, I think I'm gonna place it here just because of that ranged viability. It's halfway tempting to put it down here with Magden. I'd probably put it ahead of Magden, but I think B works for the Stamblade. Uh, Stamcro. I actually think Stamcro would go up here with A. So Stamcro, it's gonna do good single target DPS. It's bringing the Colossus. It's got something to offer to the group. It's got good cleave. Uh, yeah, just a solid class. If for whatever reason the trial team you're looking into is looking at Stam, you can't go wrong having a Stamcro in a Stam group. Next up we have the Stamden. Stamdens, oh gosh, I think Stamdens are pretty strong. I think that they bring maybe the most single target damage out of stamina DPS. Uh, I'm gonna rank them here behind Stamcrows just because they don't have the Colossus. They can bring, minor vulnerability. Usually Stam classes put a little bit more demand on their support in terms of maybe support have to run something like Morag Tong or a Stam setup that is a little bit out of their wheelhouse, and you might lose a support that would be running minor vulnerability. Uh, and so I think Stamdens go up in value because they take a little bit of that minor vulnerability off of support, which means a lot more in a Stam comp than what it does in a Mag comp. In a Mag comp, the minor vulnerability from a Magden is valued a lot less than the minor vulnerability from a Stamden in a Stam comp, just because of the added stress of setting up a trial team with stamina characters in mind. Okay, so now we're looking at Stamdk. I'm gonna put Stamdk. I'm gonna put them here. I don't think. I think damage wise, they might be here, maybe a little bit behind the Stamblade. Both in like single target, melee regards. Also, Stamdks have no real range viability. They don't have a good range spammable. Poison Claw, they got to get into melee range. So they don't bring a lot to the table from range. But I do think that they could go up here because you can have a Stamdk run something like Morag Tong. You can have a Stamdk run something like Zens. They have a little bit more flexibility in what they can bring to the group than what a Stamblade does. And so while I think they might be lower than Stamblades in terms of damage, just that added versatility, and if you're trying to get into a raid group, you can you can catch someone's eye saying, "Hey, I'm flexible. I can run Zens, or I can wear Morag Tong. I can help the group out with a Stamdk." Next we have Stamplars. Gosh, so Stamplars, they bring damage. They don't bring a lot of group utility. Um, Basically, what Stamplars do is they fill their front bar with Fighters Guild skills, and then they just jab, 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 and they don't stop jabbing. Um, and they run, a set of back bar dots. Uh, I think damage wise, they're behind Stamdens. I'm not sure where they compare with Stamcrows. I want to put them. I want to put them ahead of Stamdks, just because I don't think damage wise Stamdks can hold a torch to them. Uh, but if you're only bringing damage and you're already eclipsed by, the Stamden, and I don't even believe necessarily that Stamplars bring more cleave than a Stamden. I think I want to put them right here. Um, I think if you're good at Stamplar, you can beat out a weaker Stamden. And I think that Stamplars bring more damage than what like a Stam Nightblade would. And I think the damage will outweigh in terms of priority just the Stamdk's flexibility. Last but not least, we have the Stamsorc, and I'm going to put the Stamsorc right here. Stamsorcs are in a really weird place. If you look at Stamsorc bars this patch for DPS, they have 2 pets on, 6 skill slots. You know, it's just not a great time to be a Stamsorc. They're pigeonholed into running pets. That doesn't give them a lot of room for skills. They got to run, you know, Crushing Weapon, Bound Aegis, and it doesn't even, you know, they can't even run maybe necessarily some of the more meta sets, like if they don't have bar space for Deadly Cloak, or if they put Trap Beast on their front bar, then they don't have Deadly Cloak, so they can't use the Black Rose Daggers, which is a DPS loss. And if they don't run Trap, then that means that they have to drop something to try and get that Minor Force, which means they need to run Kinraz, which means they can't run something like Advancing or, excuse me, not Kinraz, Sogvins, which means that they couldn't run something like Advancing Kinraz or Advancing Reliquin. You know, these more damage-oriented setups would have to be sacrificed to run Sogvin. They have to make a lot of compromises in order to get their builds off the ground, and their off the ground doesn't necessarily hold a light to what these other Stam builds can do. And to top it all off, they don't bring anything to the group. You know, the Crushing Weapon debuff isn't super significant, and Stam teams aren't usually going to benefit from Minor Prophecy. It's just a weird class in a weird place, very similar to the Magden, where, you know, Magdens could bring Brittle, but we just, you know, capped crit damage. So they kind of, you know, they were already in a weak place, and now they got even weaker. Stamsorcs, you know, their heyday was a while back. They don't really synergize that well with Morag Tong, which every Stam group is going to run. You know, even with Morag Tong, you know, you might be outparsing them with even a DK with all the buffs that they have to their poison damage. They're just in a rough spot. So, yeah, that's kind of the list. Again, recommendations if you're looking to get into a trial group. Magcros are always a great place to look. If you can get past the clunkiness, a lot of people don't necessarily like playing Magcros that much because of the way that Blastbone works and how it can cause your rotation to get interrupted, or you have to adapt your rotation on the fly. So Magcro is my recommendation to get your foot in the door if you can play it well. If you're looking at a group that needs, you know, more range-oriented DPS, bringing out Nightblades, you know, if you want to progress VAS +2, VCR +3, if that's where your trial goals are taking you, then the Nightblades are a good place to look, whether it's Magblade or Stamblade. Magplar, if you enjoy the class, you know, it's viable, especially if the group isn't super sweaty. Magdk, great class to learn. You know, it's got the highest ceiling for DPS right now, and it's the most reliable in the most situations. So, yeah, that's the list. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you would like to see more in the future, please like and subscribe.